Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Straightforward topic. Let's do it. What's the scariest or creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Serious. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I worked at a subway during a period of time where a serial robber was hitting multiple subways each day and becoming violent. I worked at a particular subway that was the easiest target of them all. One employee at night, not in a shopping center, off from the main road, small parking lot covered with trees. The cops would actually come check on me at night due to how sure they were this dude was going to rob it. One night a guy came in and started fidgeting with the front door. He said he thought something was wrong with it, but then said it was fine. The guy was really nice the whole time, but started asking some odd questions about what time I get out with all the robberies happening. I felt it was odd and lied, saying I left later than I did. Later that night, I set the alarm and go to close the door, but it won't close at all. The alarm goes off. Cops fly in the parking lot. One cop starts looking at the door and finds a really small magnet that stopped the door from closing. He placed it there so I couldn't close the door. During this time, a car rolls by slowly, but everyone wrote it off as someone thinking it got robbed. A couple days later, they catch him, and it's that dude. I see footage of his car, and it was the car that drove by while I was still in the cop. In 1991, I went to a 7-Eleven by myself when we were at my grandmother's house. There was another kid there about my age, we looked similar, etc. I bought a Slurpee and walked back to my grandma's house, and that was that. The other kid was kidnapped and murdered pretty much right after leaving that 7-Eleven. The only thing I can think of that kept it from being me was maybe I won some sort of cosmic coin toss. The police are pretty sure they know who did it, but couldn't prove it, and to this day it still weirds me out. I'm 41 now and live in that neighborhood. When I was 16, I just gotten my license as well as my first after-school job. Since school ended about an hour before I had to be at work, I would sometimes park in the adjacent parking lot and take a nap. This was a shopping strip with a grocery store, restaurants, and a bank on a fairly busy Friday afternoon. As I'm sitting there drifting off, I see a black Denali pull up behind me, blocking my car in the spot. A gentleman jumps out in a business suit and asks if I can help him. He looks nice enough, and I'm assuming he's looking for directions. He starts to explain to me that his wife and he were supposed to be signing for a loan at the bank behind us today so that they can purchase a boat, but she's stuck in a meeting and can't make it. He then asks if I wouldn't mind posing as her and signing the documents for her. I'm completely blown away but super shy and feel the need to let him down easy. Stupid, I know. So I tell him I don't think they'll believe I'm your wife. He then tells me it's fine. He has her license with him, which he shows me, and she has the same hair and eye color as me, so they won't know. At this point, I'm freaking out. I start to notice how disheveled he looks. He's sweating, and surprise, surprise, no wedding ring. I just want him away from my car, so I start telling him I can't help him, that he needs to go ask someone else. He says it's fine, it'll be quick. Just jump in my truck, and I'll take you over there. Like I said, this bank was in the same shopping strip. There would be no need to drive to it. Even in my gullible teenage mind, I know this story is complete bull. I'm telling him no over and over while scanning the parking lot for anyone who might be noticing, but of course, no one has. He then starts getting irate, telling me that I'm perfect and the only one who can do it, how beautiful I am, can he at least take me to dinner, and so on. I start trying to close my window and he reaches through, grabs my shoulder and starts trying the door handle, which was luckily locked. I'm so frozen I don't even really react. I can't go anywhere as he's blocking me in. Suddenly, and I'm not really sure why, I just blurt out that I'm only 16, and for some reason that freaks him out. He slowly backs away, gets in his truck, and leaves. I called the police afterwards, but they never followed up with me. But I just know he had found that license and made up that story as a way to lure women into his truck, and it scared the hell out of me that he could have convinced someone before. Years later, I spotted him on the sex offender registry for assault.
You can read it and say, well, that's ridiculous. No one would fall for that. But the truth is, somebody really might fall for that. And it sounds like it wasn't the first time this person's tried that.
My cousin and I were probably targeted for a scam, but I still don't know how or why. We are 6 years apart, but went to the same high school at different times. Small school, graduating class about 60. Years later, we're on a road trip together several states away and decide to stop at a Huddle House for coffee. We walk in, and the guy at the next table turns around and smiles and says, "You went to Anytown High School, right?" When we say yes, he says he and his girlfriend, also at the table, smiling and not talking, went there too. We didn't recognize them, but smiled politely, commented it was a small world. He starts to rapidly talk about different things from the school, just disjointed comments that were a bit odd. He talked like a salesman almost. At first, we smile and nod, but he had weird facts wrong. So we asked what year he graduated. He claimed not to remember, oh boy. So we asked follow-up questions, and he gets cagey. Suddenly the girlfriend goes, "This isn't working," and they suddenly pay and leave, food untouched. We since have determined they didn't go to our school, and have tried to figure out how he knew what we did, to no avail. Edit. Because I got some questions, neither my cousin nor I lived in my hometown by this point. The car wasn't bought in our hometown, and didn't have any stickers, etc. from there. The guy had just enough facts correct, one or two teachers' names, and a diner across the street, totally off the cuff that we really questioned it afterwards. When I was about 5, I was visiting my grandma in the city with my mom, dad, and sister. We were walking toward the city center, so it was pretty crowded. I remember letting go of my dad's hand and then feeling him grab back hold of it a few moments later. I kept walking, I don't know how far. I hear my dad shouting from behind me and grabbing my other arm. I hear him say sorry, and I look up and realize I was holding hands with an old man that I didn't know. My dad assumed that I'd accidentally grabbed onto this man's hand thinking he was my dad. I remember him pulling me away all embarrassed, and I was just thinking, but the man grabbed my hand. So basically, I think some guy tried to snatch me out of a crowded area. I still don't understand why my dad thought I grabbed onto his hand. My parents were normally quite paranoid about strangers. He must have been distracted when talking to my grandma. I was probably 9 years old in about 1995. At that time, all the schools and parents were warning us of stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping the kidnappers find a lost pet. One day I was riding my bike alone on our street, a fairly populated street, lots of kids out playing and whatnot, and a green two-door car pulled up with a woman driving and a guy in the passenger seat. The guy calls out the window to me, "Hey kid, we lost our dog, could you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling I felt. It was like sirens were going off, and I thought for a split second that this was it. I was going to be kidnapped. A rush of what felt like burning hot adrenaline shit through my body. I felt like I could hear everything 10 times louder and see everything 10 times better. I've never felt anything like that before. I hopped off my bike, pulled the front tire up so I could turn around faster, and I booked it home. I was shaking, and tears were pouring down my face, even though I wasn't crying. I got home and told my mom what happened. She called the police, but I'm not sure if the people were ever caught. Crazy? I would sleepwalk as a child. Usually I'd wake up in the living room, or I would freak myself out and wake up in the basement. On one occasion I had wandered outside. I was 7 or 8, and I woke up standing in the middle of my backyard on a super foggy morning right about sunrise. I quickly figured out which direction my house was and ran back to bed. I never told my parents about it because I figured they would be mad at me for going outside when I should have been asleep. We moved into a new place, built around 1930 and sometimes in the 70s had a fire. My 3-year-old at the time started running around the house and playing hide and seek with himself. Kids weren't allowed in our room, but our room was on the first floor and the closet was actually the underside of the stairs. He kept running in there and shouting, "Found you, hide better." We didn't think much of it. New house, kids have imaginary friends. Until that night, when he asked if Sam could sleep in his room. He said she was lonely, but they're friends now, so she can sleep with him. She doesn't want to sleep in the closet anymore. No one else ever saw her, and weird things rarely happened. We moved a year later, and except for the day after we moved, he asked if she can come too. He's never spoken of her again.
Kids say the darndest things, so maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe it was an old ghost from a fire.
I was very close to my grandfather. He was easily the best person in my life. He was an amazing man and went way out of his way to be supportive and connected. He He wrote me letters all the time. We stayed at their house often. He encouraged my education and would send word books, novels, etc. for me. He had worked in education until he retired as school district superintendent and really believed in the importance of early childhood education and reading. He was very involved in my education and a very positive man. He died when I was 14, and I was devastated. It really changed a lot of my family dynamics. He had always been the head of the family. My dad, his son, was an alcoholic. I struggled with depression. It was a really hard time for me, and I missed him greatly. I still do. When I was 25, my first child was born. We named her Raven, not a super common name here in Canadian. When she was about 4 or 5, I was browsing through the discarded books at our local library and came across a book about a raven who thought she had ugly feathers and wanted beautiful feathers like all the other birds. The moral of the book being that we all have our own traits and abilities that make us special, and that through accepting ourselves and our own individuality, we will have a much better life than if we try to be something we aren't. I thought it was a touching book and really seemed perfect for my daughter Raven, so I bought it and took it home. When I went to read it to her later that day, I opened to the front cover and saw a sort of sticker plaque on the inside cover. It said that this book had been donated to the city's library system, among several others, in my grandfather's name when he died. I dropped the book in shock, and a chill ran up my spine, but there it was. His name, his date of death, a blurb about how important children's education had always been to him, and how he believed our children are the future. He had left a sum of money in his will to our city's public library system to use to purchase books for the children's section. I called my mom and told her about this. She was stunned. She knew that this had been a part of his will, but that was it. So, I happened to pick up a book at my local library, out of quite a few libraries, it's a big city, about a raven, my daughter's name, who learned to love herself for who she was, which had always been my grandfather's message to me, that had been donated by my grandfather's estate to the library system 15 years previously, on the day that it was put out for sale as a used discard book. Bought it and had not found the plaque inside until I went to read it at home. It felt like a gift from him to add, and my child. I can't even fathom the odds of that happening. I have never been a believer of the supernatural, and I don't believe my grandfather's ghost somehow arranged this, but it does seem to be a stretch to call it a coincidence. I like to believe that his spirit somehow still checks in on me and my kids. I don't know how else to explain this. It still sends a chill up my spine. At the time, I felt such a sense of love and comfort. I've missed my grandfather for many years now. My daughter is 14, the age I was when he died. She's long grown out of reading that story, but I keep it close just the same. I was home alone laying down on my living room floor, and hardcore spacing out at the ceiling. I heard my mother scream on my front porch. I rushed out, but she wasn't there. I ran around the outside of my house, not a single person in sight. It 10,000% sounded like my mom, and it curdled my bones because it was so raw and animalistic in its sound. I called her right away. Mom picks up the phone, and I ask her if she is alright. She responded that she is, and tells me to hold on for a minute while she pulls over into the parking lot of a business. She was driving and didn't want to talk on the phone at the same time. Seconds later, I hear a lot of noise, and my mom screamed. An eternity stretches on before Mom is calm enough to say anything coherent. She goes on to tell me how the car in front of her and the one behind her before she pulled over, the ones that continued on the same path of travel that she had been on, had been struck by a speeding semi that ran a red light at the next intersection. It was a terrible accident with extensive injuries. The semi clipped the rear of the front vehicle and the front of the rear vehicle. My mom's car would have been hit dead center. We always joke that we are psychic, as this is not the first instance like it that we have had, but it was definitely the most freaky of the bunch. Most of my life, I've had what I call normal life prediction dreams, where I'll have a very vivid dream of like me and two of my friends driving on a road I know after seeing a movie, and then it just happens sometimes later. Well, more recently I had a dream where I was running late for work, and I hopped in my car, turned the key, and the car exploded, sending me to the ER and keeping me hospitalized for about a year. I remember it being very sunny, and I had a gray shirt that said, technically the glass is completely full, and I was wearing a Legend of Zelda hat. Well, lo and behold, I'm late for work, and the shirt and hat that are easiest to grab are those too. I step outside and get blindsided by the sun. I decided to call off work that day, claiming I was taking a personal health day, and had my stepdad come look at my car. Turns out there was a problem with the fuel line and oil, so it would have been bad had the key sparked. And this car was already on death's door, so we just sold it for parts.
Well, that's pretty cool, first of all, to have that kind of active deja vu, but not only that, but actually then listening to it. Who knows what could have really happened, and it may have been nothing, but I kind of dig what you did, so cool.
I was home alone sleeping when all of a sudden I felt a presence crawling up onto my bed. I can hear the sheets ruffling and feel the bed sinking, all while I hear a soft laughter getting louder and more intense as it gets closer to me. Finally, after what felt like it was literally next to my ear, I wake up. As I turn my head to look to see what the hell was laughing at me, I see this nondescript figure hovering over me and burst out in what I can only describe as the most aggressive laughter, all while shaking my bed violently. My head felt like it was being rattled from all the shaking. At that moment, I wanted to scream as loudly as I could, but I could not summon the strength to so much as turn my head away from what I was seeing. I was terrified and angry at myself for being absolutely terrified and not being able to even attempt to defend myself from this creature that had spent what felt like minutes taunting me. When I was finally able to muster the strength to fight back, it had already disappeared from the room with its laugh echoing. Turns out, I have schizophrenia, and this was the first of many hallucinations that plagued me throughout my late teens to my mid-20s. With therapy, and the early realization that it might be mental illness, I was able to keep myself relatively sane. That was almost over 15 years ago. It's gotten better, and these days it doesn't happen as often, but when it does, it usually whenever I get severely stressed in a short period of time, or moderately stressed over a prolonged period of time. Edit. Thank you for all the well wishes about my mental illness. I should clarify, up until this point, I had my suspicions that something was wrong with well before this happened to me. Mostly it was auditory hallucinations, hearing familiar voices when the people whose voices they belonged to clearly were not there, such as at the doctor's office when I was sitting by myself, or a very loud foghorn, like the ones on ships going off at home when I was by myself. Hearing distant, indistinct conversations in rooms that were empty and shushing would stop the moment I stepped into that room. Hearing static noise whenever I go, etc. And remembering events and conversations with friends that never happened. But this was the first full-blown sensory hallucination I ever had, with more to follow whenever I would try and sleep at night. Sometimes they would happen every day, and sometimes they would happen every other day or week. With all the little things that were off, it's easy to see how some people with schizophrenia can become paranoid and spiral down even further. I guess it really boils down to whether or not the individual can objectively assess what is happening to them. I happen to be lucky. I was already going to therapy for my depression and PTSD. My alcoholic father and his family and my older brother were my abusers, and at one point, when we were children, he had attempted siblicide. I did as well, not long after, so yeah, my stress growing up was through the roof. So, thanks to the technique and practices I learned in counseling, I didn't hesitate to bring this up to my doctor because there is nothing wrong with seeking help, and the calming techniques really helped with bringing my illness to a manageable level. My experiences on medication, well, that is a story for another time. Oh, almost forgot. Yes, that was in fact sleep paralysis. I've had them before, but this was the first time I was fully conscious during it. Whenever I had it before, I was always be in this semi-conscious, half-dazed state. This one I was fully awake, eyes open. I felt its weight and its breath as it laughed in my face. Smelled like cherry medicine for some reason. Also, before anyone distastefully asks, no, the voices never told me to do anything or harm anyone. A lot of the berating though. And also, not carbon monoxide poisoning. It's state law in California that every home has to have a carbon monoxide detector along with a smoke detector, and my bed was no more than 3 feet from the CO detector.